Welcome to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. A tweet from Glaswegian comedian Frankie Boyle reads, "I can see Trump having a nervous breakdown so vast that his screams rebound off the moon and crush Tokyo." Stacey.
That was a way for us to continue our theme of talking about the politics of the U.S. elections and lead me into my first headline, which reads, Tokyo condo prices may fall 20%, Deutsche Bank says. Not because Donald Trump may crash down from the moon and whatever, but the Bank of Japan's shift to controlling bond yields is driving up mortgage rates, prompting Deutsche Bank to predict Tokyo apartment prices may fall 20% or more by 2018. And the interesting thing about this is that they say the reason for this is because of a shift in Bank of Japan policy, which the adoption of the new monetary policy is, in effect, a form of tapering. And you can't taper a Ponzi scheme.
What was the first part? Something about bond prices?
Well, the Bank of Japan is shifting their shift to controlling bond yields. So they want to boost longer-term yields.
Yeah.
So this is causing mortgage rates to rise,
That's right.
which is causing house prices or condo prices, according to the Deutsche Bank, are saying that they will fall by 20 to 30% by 2018.
Right. Of course. You know, this is an interesting global phenomenon because you had, I guess, what you could call a virtuous circle, in that interest rates are going down and asset prices or, property prices were going up, which was used as collateral to buy more property in an environment that did in an environment by governments who don't include a rising house price in their index of inflation. So the governments would say, there's no inflation. We don't count house prices. We just look at cheap made stuff from Asia in our index of inflation. And by that index, there is no inflation. So they would keep interest rates low or drop interest rates and keep them going lower and lower. Electronics, they would say, oh, there's no inflation. Electronics prices are cheap. That's their basket of inflation. And so, but they don't include house prices. So let me finish.
Yeah.
Let me finish.
Okay.
So this created a virtuous circle of rising property, lower rates. But, as night follows day, as gravity is a real force of nature, as economics is something that you cannot play with indefinitely without the forces of reality coming back into the picture, we are now into a vicious cycle where interest rates are going to start creeping higher, and therefore asset prices or property prices will start to roll over, which will diminish the value of the collateral people have been using to borrow, which will make the property trading, property easing, property price softness become more pronounced, turn into a crash. Remember in 1989, Japan had the biggest real estate crash in memory. Real estate prices dropped 70, 80, 90%. And you went into a two decades in Japan. So this is not to be a shock for them. But here in the UK, we're going to see the exact same thing. Property prices are rolling over and interest rates are starting to go up thanks to Brexit, because Brexit now has brought in inflation. And the Bank of England says, well, yes, we have inflation, and they're going to start raising interest rates, and all those adjustable rate mortgages in the UK are going to start ratcheting up. You're going to have falling asset prices and rising interest rates simultaneously, which is great for savers. And on a the real incomes of real people on an adjusted basis will appear to be going up. So there's that. But the size of the UK economy is going to shrink by 50%.
So part of the story here is that central banks and partly governments have been intervening in markets for so long that they're having to raise rates, lower rates, trying to manipulate the prices.
Well, they've been lowering rates.
They've been, now the Bank of Japan's policies they're trying to raise longer rates. I assume because pension funds are squealing and being hurt
by
negative
bonds, by dumping, by selling.
Yeah.
And that'll set off a global cascade of an avalanche of selling of fixed assets, fixed income. It'll be a race to the market. Those who panic first panic best. So if Japan government is panicking now to get the heck out of the long-term bonds, they're panicking ahead of the crowd. The rest of the crowd will panic soon.
So there's also the currency in the mix, which is the yen is the global carry trade, but currency and monetary policy go hand in hand. And I want to turn to a story here in the UK because sterling is one of the worst performing currencies of the year. It's down 20% against the US dollar. And here's a very fascinating headline and first paragraph from a Market Watch story. It reads, US investors miss out on giant UK stock rally. The UK stock market is white hot right now, with FTSE 100 trading near record highs. But unfortunately for foreign investors, the sharp drop in the British pound would have erased all their profits and then some. So this is also has to be factored into this. House prices can continue to rise in British pound terms, but especially in London, most of the luxury properties are bought by foreign buyers, so they're looking at huge losses, 20% losses on their portfolio.
The companies in the UK that do business overseas have benefited by the drop in the pound. The poor yobs that make up 90% of the population who are stuck on this godforsaken island are not benefiting from the fall in the pound. All they're getting is a loss of purchasing power and wages squeezed, and they don't own the FTSE 100. None of these frickin' chavs own the FTSE 100, FTSE 500. They don't own it.
So because of the foreign buyers already facing huge losses on the the collapsing pound, we see sales of double-digit million-pound UK homes fall 86%.
What? 86%?
This is homes worth 10 million pounds or more, and that has been much of the London property market. Well, there were only 5 transactions in the past 3 months versus 35 in the same period last year. So that's collapsing due to the Brexit stuff, due to the collapsing sterling, and of course, new taxes imposed on second properties by the UK government. But this is another interesting story that got overlooked last week. It was only reported in an industry paper and Reuters. So here it goes. UK to buy unsold new homes to spur construction. So Britain's government will buy unsold homes built by developers using a £2 billion fund announced earlier this week. That was last week. A move designed to get construction firms to commit to bigger projects. So this is part of a £5 billion project to get more houses built. They're going to buy unsold properties from developers, but this is the interesting thing. It is about us going to a house builder, and instead of expecting the normal build-out rate of 50 units a year, we'll say, we want you to build up 500 in one go, and what we'll do is guarantee to take them off your hands if you can't find a buyer. Ed Lister, chairman of Homes and Communities Agency, told Property Week. And they said they're doing this because of a chronic shortage of properties.
Look, the government is getting bigger in the UK.
Yeah.
Okay, the government is increasing in size. The government won't step in and provide health services. They'll throw that to the wolves of foreign interest. They won't step in to improve transportation. They throw that to the wolves of foreign interest and Richard Branson. They will step in and buy property to help their property-owning rentier scum brethren. Yes, they will. And in so doing, increase the size of UK government as a percentage of GDP. Thatcher was like, let's downsize Britain and not have government be 60% of GDP like France. Let's be more like America. So she went ahead and fired all these civil servants and privatized everything. But now in 2016, the reverse is happening. And ironically, Jeremy Corbyn, who's somebody who could actually manage a government takeover of these public services, is being shunned in favor of these rentier knuckleheads in the Tory government who don't know how to run, how to wipe themselves without 10 civil servants are running the country into the ground.
But let's go over this again to see how politicians try to control the free market, and yet they don't seem to understand the free market. So they're saying there's a chronic shortage of properties, and there are so many young people trying to get on the property ladder but they can't because of a chronic shortage of properties. And yet, on the other hand, the government's saying, here's £2 billion for developers for unsold properties. So there's no shortage of properties. There's properties that are unsold. What could be the other part of the equation of a free market? Price? Maybe the prices need to come down and the properties will sell. Maybe that is a problem.
No, they don't understand economics like this. Of course, if you have foreign money that's pumped up with Bank of England free cash that drives the price of a £500,000 flat to £10 million, you're going to price out a lot of your population. If you let prices exist in a competitive environment and let the market clear itself without government interference, you would not have a housing crisis in this country. But because the government, who just prides itself on being laissez-faire, is so interventionalist, and the Bank of England is so politicized, you end up with a housing crisis.
Also, remember, under Margaret Thatcher, you brought her up, what the governments, the local governments, councils used to build properties. And if you look at any of the charts of how many properties used to be built when the local councils could build properties for their local poor people who couldn't afford properties, but then Margaret Thatcher said, well, you can build all you want, local councils, but the tenant has a right to buy it at below market rates at whatever point. So, of course, they stopped building properties, right? Because they're going to lose money. Everybody's going to choose to take the 30, 40, 50, 60% discount and flip it to a foreigner.
But because of Brexit, the City of London is being destroyed. All that business is moving to Frankfurt, Paris, New York, which is great because this economy will become more diversified, away from the monoculture that is the City of London and financiers and rentiers. And you find more people will be leaving London because they don't need to be near the city, and they're going to go to Manchester, they're going to go to Newcastle, they're going to go up north, and they're going to build maybe a train system for these folks, and you're going to have a diversified economy.
So just like Tokyo and the Bank of Japan trying to control interest rates, here we have a country that needs 300,000 properties a year. They have not built more than 200,000 properties per year in any year in the past decade, despite all of the programs, but despite help to lend, help to buy, first-time depositor ISAs, all these programs, and nothing is stirring the so-called free market.
Look, you Marmite-swilling, lazy English people, get on a train for an hour and go north. You can buy a house for two-bedroom house for 20% discount. There's plenty of houses. Just get off your butt and get on a train, you lazy good-for-nothings.
Well, it sounds like Max is having a nervous breakdown, and so bad that his vast screams will rebound off the moon and crush Tokyo.
Yeah, but I've repackaged those as a collateralized scream obligation bond through Goldman Sachs, and I'm going to make 1 billion screams back. Stay tuned for the second half. More. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. Time now to go to Portugal and speak with journalist, writer, and comedy guy, Charlie Skelton, who is busy working on a project with Frankie Boyle on the U.S. elections. Charlie has just returned from working on a comedy roast in Los Angeles. So we're going to talk to him about his observations of the wackiest of U.S. elections in quite a few generations. Charlie, welcome.
Hello, Max. How are you?
Great. All right. So, Charlie, your general assessment of the media coverage of these surreal U.S. elections.
Well, I think everyone's a little bit bewildered, I think it's fair to say. Everyone is reacting, and there's a lot of knee-jerk reaction to, well, mainly Trump. And I think he's caused a lot of brains to turn cartwheels, which is not to say that he's not a dreadful person, but I think he's proved one of the most interesting features in the political landscape for a very long time. And comedy landscape.
Now, in her speeches to the elite bankers, Hillary said that she speaks public to the lumpen masses in one way and about them in private another way. We know that Trump can be vulgar. He's no different in public to his private self, it seems. But Hillary seems to have two distinct personalities, Charlie.
I think you've exactly hit the mark, which is that I think Trump is kind of all surface. There's no... He's right out there. So for a journalist, he's incredibly easy to write about because he's just there. He's shouting his nonsense and he's grabbing his other people's genitalia, or at least talking about it in public. It's all a full. He's like sort of SpongeBob SquarePants or something. He's right out there. Whereas Hillary is a much better politician. As she says, she's got a public and a private persona, and so for journalists it's just a little bit harder to write about. You have to do a little bit more digging. You have to put a few things together, whereas he's out there, and she's not out there. But what I think particularly these WikiLeaks emails and the Podesta stuff has shown is that you can piece together a kind of character of Hillary Clinton to supplement everything we know as well about her. And so yeah, I think journalists are starting to have to do a little bit more journalism, which is great.
Right. Now, some of the Podesta emails show a close relationship between Podesta and the media with private off-the-record dinners over lobster risotto. As a journalist yourself, what do you think of this relationship? These journalists will no doubt claim it does not influence their reporting, but it seems like that's a possibility, Charlie.
Well, definitely. I mean, there's a lot of talk of friendly journalists, of people you can place stories with, and they name names, and it must be a little bit embarrassing for those, in inverted commas, journalists to be so named and to be called by campaign managers and things like that and press officers. A friendly is not a great compliment for a journalist. I think you're not doing your job if you're friendly, I would say.
Now, I mean, another creepy moment from these emails, the Podesta emails, a young flunky suggests that he planted an anti-bank comment into one of her speeches so she could leak this bit and claim to have spoken truth to power. It's all very Machiavellian. Yeah.
Well, but first of all, the phrase "speaking truth to power" is, when used completely unironically about Hillary Clinton speaking to the banks, is quite revealing. You know who pulls the strings in this scenario. And in fact, when Hillary talks about, she's put herself out there as a kind of an American exceptionalist, particularly in foreign policy. She made a big speech to the American Legion about this. But when she talks about being an American exceptionalist, I think she really means Wall Street, and she means the military-industrial complex. That's who she is clearly, locking arms with. Arms being a suitable word. I think what we can see is that she's incredibly close to Wall Street, but we've known that for a long time, and she's incredibly close to kind of the Bilderberg circles, as is Bill Clinton, and she's definitely an insider. She's in the system, and I think that's what's been so interesting to watch, is the kind of bucking and freaking out of the system at seeing someone like Trump, who just for all of his awful faults isn't as glued into the system as Hillary is. She reminds me of that kind of the face of the machines in the Matrix when they all sort of form a human face. That's kind of she's that built into the system, that's happened in the UK with Jeremy Corbyn, and it's happened with Brexit. You've seen the system kind of just go into paroxysms because perhaps they've lost control of a party, or which has happened with Corbyn and Trump. It's not a fun time for, in inverted commas, the system.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because you've been actually covering the Bilderberg meetings for a number of years, and a few years ago, the existence of the Bilderberg group, almost a global shadow government, if you will, was denied. Then people started talking about it openly. Then they started to it became more of an issue. But these Podesta emails seems to suggest that, yes, in fact, there is pretty much a shadow world government that's operating in the U.S., that's calling the shots, basically, that puts up candidates like a Hillary Clinton. Barack Obama's cabinet was selected by Citigroup, So, I mean, how does that, where are we on in this story? Because the so-called, what was called a conspiracy theory just a few months ago, it looks like that it's no longer a theory. It's more of a fact now, Charlie.
Well, absolutely. And you can see that, it's very interesting to see Goldman Sachs and Deutsche Bank both playing a key role behind the scenes. And because you can trace the influence of particularly Goldman Sachs through Bilderberg, through funding it, through senior members of Goldman Sachs being there, being on the steering committee. Same with Deutsche Bank. The head of Deutsche Bank is a key member of Bilderberg. Yeah, absolutely. You can. What I think is very interesting is she also talks. Hillary also talks about having to have these two pragmatic parties, and I think what that means is it's kind of the realpolitik parties that are answerable to this. To the strings of power, and to the money and to Wall Street. I think this has put these the choices, the false choices we get all the time in democracy, puts the voter into a very awkward situation. I think it's why everyone goes a bit mad around these election times. It's because they're being presented with a sort of democratic system which just isn't that.
Right. So now, what attracts you to what's happening in the U.S. political scene? Because It doesn't get a lot of coverage in the UK. We're in the UK. We talk about it, but it doesn't get a lot of coverage other than the very superficial kind of daily digest of the latest Trump utterances. But so what attracted you to what's going on with Bilderberg and now what's unraveling as becoming this enormously corrupt institutionalization of a kleptocracy in the U.S.? How did you get into it, Charlie?
I got into it because for the simple reason that I back in whenever it was 2009, I found a weird kind of disjuncture between the clear significance and power of certain groups of people and certain lobby groups and what have you. You can call Bilderberg a lobby group, as amongst other things, and you could see all of these incredibly important and powerful and self-important and rich people meeting together, but and heads of media and owners of media companies, but not much media coverage. In fact, almost none back then. And I think it was it was the difference between the thing itself and its coverage in the media that made me go, well, something is odd. I think maybe I should just, I don't know, take a punt and have a see whether I can write about it. And I think so. And I think that applies as well to the US election this year. It's seeing an incredible kind of gloss, slightly the opposite end of the spectrum. This incredible gloss over this event, and then the substance of it really not being talked about that much, except in certain sort of outsiderish ways.
Yeah, I would contrast this a little bit with, let's say, during the 60s and the Nixon years. Comedians at that time, you remember the Smothers Brothers and other very politicized comedians at that time, along with the culture of the time, rock and roll, Bob Dylan, et cetera, just got the Nobel Prize. They had an impact on ending the Vietnam War, on impeaching a president, on changing the course of political history. Here we are in 2016, however, though, with a crisis that's substantially more dangerous in many ways. We have genuinely evil apparatchiks in the form of Hillary Clinton assuming an incredible amount of power, and yet the popular culture of which you are tied into, certainly through comedy and with Frankie Boyle, it seems out of reach for satire. It seems out of reach for any comment because it's hard to describe exactly why. Perhaps the pervasiveness of social media where it's almost impossible nothing has a life. It's just immediately sucked into this torrent of it's hard to describe it. I mean, I'm just trying to come up with something. Yeah. What do you think, Charlie?
Well, I think that Trump is sort of bad news for comedy in one sense because he's so comic and so comedic and so outre, whatever the word is. He's so just crazily out there, and it makes it very easy to use him, simply sort of cut and paste and use him as the punchline. Go look at him, point at him, and go look at him. And comically, there's not much sort of work being done there. There's not much heavy lifting. It's not very interesting. But in order to mock Hillary Clinton, you suddenly find yourself having to talk about Wall Street or talk about Goldman Sachs and the Podesta emails, and suddenly it's like, oh my God, that's too complicated. So it's very hard for the kind of comic spectrum to find a place to sit and go, okay, here's how I can talk about this in a way that will be funny, in a way that people will understand and get, because people's attention is span and just attention generally is shrinking and shrinking to the point where on social media you would sort of think there was only one event in the news, which was, Trump Clinton, and it's so that the news is now it can only deal with one event at any one time, and even within that one event you can only deal with Trump almost. So everything is just down and down and down and down to an absolute microscopic point. As a sort of singularity, which again isn't very funny. It's just it's anti-satirical. So yeah, it's difficult. I'd say these are difficult times.
Yeah,
interesting times for comedy, but difficult times.
So what I'm hearing is that adding it all together, you're still looking at Trump as a better alternative to the known quantity that is Hillary. Is that a fair statement?
God, I wouldn't say. I think that I would prefer to break the double bind that people are in and just say you need to step back from this choice and look at both of them and see the craziness. The craziness isn't Donald Trump. The craziness is the system. And the craziness is the influence and the power of the military-industrial complex, of Wall Street, of these hidden actors that we're just seeing glimpses of within these emails. That's the crazy thing. The crazy thing is that you're having to choose in this situation between these two sort of tiny little sort of aspects of a giant system.
All right, Charlie, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks so much for being on the show.
That's okay. Thank you very much, Max.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacey Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, Charlie Skelton. If you'd like to get in touch, tweet us at Keiser Report. Until next time, bye, y'all.